He was a loyal and brave soldier who fought for his country and his emperor. He was a stubborn and proud warrior who refused to surrender and to accept defeat. He was a lost and lonely man who lived in isolation and ignorance for 29 years. He was Hiroo Onoda, the Japanese soldier who refused to believe World War II was over. World War II was the most devastating and destructive war in human history. It involved more than 100 million people from over 30 countries and lasted from 1939 to 1945. It resulted in more than 70 million deaths, millions of injuries, and massive damage to the environment and infrastructure. It also changed the political and social landscape of the world and shaped the course of the 20th century. One of the main participants and aggressors of World War II was Japan, an island nation in East Asia that had ambitions of expanding its empire and influence in the region and beyond. Japan allied itself with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, forming the Axis powers, and waged war against the Allied powers, which included the United States, the United Kingdom, France, China, and the Soviet Union. Japan attacked and invaded several countries and territories in Asia and the Pacific, such as China, Korea, the Philippines, Singapore, Burma, Indonesia, and Australia. Japan also launched a surprise attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7, 1941, which brought the US into the war. Japan fought fiercely and fanatically using its military and naval might, as well as its cultural and spiritual values such as Bushido, the code of the samurai, which emphasized loyalty, honor, and sacrifice. Japan also employed unconventional and suicidal tactics such as kamikaze or suicide pilots who crashed their planes into enemy ships and targets. However, Japan also faced overwhelming resistance and retaliation from the Allies, who mobilized their resources and technology and launched counterattacks and invasions on Japan's occupied territories and mainland. Japan also suffered from the effects of war, such as shortages of food, fuel, and materials, as well as bombings and firestorms that destroyed many of its cities and killed many of its civilians. The turning point of the war came in August 1945, when the US dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing hundreds of thousands of people and causing unprecedented devastation and radiation. Japan finally surrendered on August 15, 1945, ending World War II. Hiroo Onoda was born on March 19, 1922, in Kainan, Wakayama, Japan. He was the fifth son of a wealthy and patriotic family who owned a textile factory. He was educated in a military academy and joined the Japanese Army in 1942 at the age of 20. He was trained as an intelligence officer and learned guerrilla warfare, espionage, and survival skills. On December 26, 1944, he was sent to Lubang Island in the Philippines as part of the 14th Area Army. His mission was to gather information and disrupt the enemy activities on the island, and to prevent the Allied forces from using the airfield and the harbor. He was also ordered to never surrender and to fight until the end. He arrived on the island with a group of other soldiers, but soon found himself isolated and outnumbered as the Allies landed and captured most of the island. He retreated to the mountains and jungles, along with three other soldiers, Yuichi Akatsu, Shoichi Shimada, and Kinshichi Kozuka. They formed a small unit and continued to carry out their mission, raiding and sabotaging the enemy facilities and supplies, and engaging in skirmishes and shootouts with the local police and militia. They also received and ignored several leaflets and messages dropped by the Allies and the Japanese, informing them of the end of the war and urging them to surrender. They dismissed them as propaganda and lies and remained loyal to their orders and their emperor. They also avoided contact with the locals and the other Japanese soldiers who had surrendered and lived in hiding and hardship, surviving on fruits, coconuts, rice, and animals. The four soldiers lived and fought together for several years, but their situation and their morale deteriorated over time. In 1949, Akatsu decided to leave the group and surrender after becoming disillusioned and depressed. He tried to persuade the others to join him, but they refused and considered him a traitor. He wandered around the island for 6 months before he was captured by the Philippine Army. In 1954, Shimada was killed in a shootout with a search party, After he and Onoda had attacked a village and stolen some rice, Onoda was devastated by the loss of his friend and comrade and buried him in a secret grave. He also became more cautious and paranoid and avoided any contact with the outside world. In 1972, Kozuka was also killed in a shootout after he and Onoda had burned a rice silo in a village. Onoda was shocked and enraged by the death of his last companion and vowed to avenge him and continue the fight. He also became more lonely and desperate and wondered if he was the only Japanese soldier left in the world. However, his fate changed in 1974 when he met Norio Suzuki, a Japanese adventurer and traveler who had come to the island to look for him. Suzuki had heard of Onoda's story and was fascinated by his legend. He searched for him in the jungle and managed to find him and talk to him. He told him that the war was over and that Japan had lost. He also told him that he was a hero and that the people of Japan wanted him to come back. He showed him some newspapers and magazines and offered him some cigarettes and sake. Onoda was surprised and intrigued by Suzuki, but he was also skeptical and suspicious. He did not believe that the war was over, and he did not trust that Suzuki was telling the truth. He also did not want to disobey his orders, and he did not want to leave his post. He told Suzuki that he would only surrender if he received a direct order from his superior officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, who had given him his original mission. Suzuki agreed to help Onoda and returned to Japan to look for Taniguchi. He managed to find him and persuaded him to come to the Philippines to meet Onoda. He also contacted the Japanese and Philippine governments and arranged for a formal and peaceful surrender ceremony. On March 9, 1974, Onoda finally emerged from the jungle, wearing his old and torn uniform and carrying his rifle and sword. He was greeted by Suzuki, Taniguchi, and a delegation of Japanese and Philippine officials and journalists. Taniguchi read out the order of surrender and told Onoda that he had done his duty and that he was relieved of his command. Onoda saluted and handed over his weapons and broke down in tears. He was 52 years old and had spent 29 years in the jungle, believing that he was still at war. Onoda's surrender and return caused a sensation and a controversy in Japan and the Philippines and around the world. He was hailed as a hero and a legend, and also criticized as a murderer and a fanatic. He was welcomed and celebrated, and also questioned and challenged. He was honored and rewarded, and also sued and pardoned. Onoda was flown to Japan, where he was reunited with his family and friends, and met by a huge and enthusiastic crowd. He was also received by the Japanese Prime Minister and the Emperor, who thanked him for his service and loyalty. He was also given a pension and a compensation, and offered a job and a house. However, Onoda also faced difficulties and challenges in adjusting to the modern and changed Japan and to the peaceful and democratic society. He was also troubled and tormented by the memories and the consequences of his actions, and by the guilt and the grief of his losses. He also faced legal and moral issues, as he was accused and sued by the Philippine government and the relatives of the people he had killed or injured on the island. He was eventually granted a pardon by the Philippine president, who recognized his unique and exceptional situation. Onoda also decided to leave Japan and move to Brazil, where he bought a ranch and became a farmer. He also married a Japanese woman and had a son. He also traveled and lectured around the world and wrote a book about his experience titled No Surrender: My 30-Year War.